Welcome to the Grow My Salon Business podcast, where we focus on the business side of hairdressing. I'm your host, Anthony Whitaker, and I'll be talking to thought leaders in the hairdressing industry, discussing insightful, provocative, and inspiring ideas that matter. So get ready to learn, get ready to be challenged, get ready to be inspired, and most importantly, get ready to grow your salon business. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Whitaker, and it's great to have you here with us today. Now, some podcast episodes that I do, I'm really excited about. Others, I'm a little bit nervous about. And today's episode definitely falls into the nervous category. Now, in case you don't know, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so I wanted to devote an episode to talk about breast cancer, partly because this is a predominantly female-led industry, but also because as hairdressers, we're also often involved with that very personal and intimate time in a woman's life if they are unfortunate enough to have breast cancer and they're losing their hair, etc. So most of us, myself included, will have someone in our life who's been directly impacted by breast cancer, whether it's a family member, grandmother, mother, sister, close friend, colleague, or perhaps indeed yourself. Breast cancer is the most common form of cancer. But the good news is that whereas 20 to 30 years ago it was a death sentence for many people, today survival rates have improved dramatically and they continue to do so. So before this podcast, I did a little research and I found myself listening to an excellent podcast, which I'm happy to refer everyone to go and listen to. And that podcast is called And Then Along Came Breast Cancer. And it's hosted by a UK-based TV personality, a lady by the name of Victoria Derbyshire, who is also a survivor of breast cancer. And anyway, before I knew it, I had listened to several episodes, which was definitely a huge education for me. And on one of those podcast episodes, it was titled Breast Cancer and Hair. And there were three guests on it. And one of them was a young lady by the name of Nicky Elkington. Now, Nicky is not only a hairdresser, but she's also a survivor of breast cancer. So I think that she is the perfect person for me to talk with today. Now, I'm also aware that this is a deeply personal and intimate subject for many people. So I reached out to Nicky and I asked her if she'd be a guest on the show and share her experiences, and she's very happy to. Obviously, I'm not a doctor and neither is Nicky, and I don't mind saying that I'm feeling totally out of my depth. Now, obviously, Nicky can only talk about her experiences as a survivor of breast cancer, but she can also talk about it in the context of being a hairdresser. But as is often said, every woman's journey is unique to them. So in today's podcast, we're going to discuss how Nicky dealt with the initial impact of finding out that she had breast cancer, the treatments and dealing with hair loss, and so much more. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Nicky Elkington.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very nervous, but also happy to be here today.
Good. So I'll tell you what, Nicky, let's start off with just to settle things down a little bit. Obviously, there's going to be some people that listen to this who already know who you are, but 99% of the audience have not heard of you. So let's just start off. I've given a little bit of an introduction, but who is Nicky Elkington? Give us your sort of, 60-second backstory.
Hi, well, yeah, I'm Nicky. I'm 44 years old. I've been a hairdresser since I was 15 years old. I started as a Saturday girl and went full-time from leaving school, and it's always been a huge passion of mine. I love it. I did get married in 2014 to Richard, who was my husband, and he sadly died suddenly at the end of 2019. So not only having to deal with breast cancer that year, I also had to deal with the sudden loss of my husband, which has been horrific. But I'm kind of at a point now where I'm just starting to live life again. I have wonderful friends who I spend a lot of time with. I love going to concerts. Kylie Minogue is my one love of life. I've loved her since I was 7 years old. I love going to the gym. Fitness is a huge thing for me. It always has been, especially post cancer. And I love my cat. And TV, I'm just quite, just a regular girl who goes to work and just enjoys socializing with my friends and just,
having a good time, enjoying life. Okay. That was interesting, actually, that I mentioned the podcast, the Victoria Derbyshire podcast, that I was listening to that. And it was, I mean, on this podcast, it's just you and me talking. On the Victoria Derbyshire podcast, she often had 3 or 4 guests. And all of those guests were survivors of breast cancer. And one of the things that really stood out in almost every podcast is there was a lot of laughter. There was a lot of laughter. There was a lot of sort of sisterly love and sharing. And it really sort of came across to me, because I suppose there's no male equivalent to that sort of thing. Like I said in the intro, that 1 in 7 women will get breast cancer. That is a terrible statistic to have to live through as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So, look, before we start talking about your personal journey, can we start off by just a little sort of overview about breast cancer? Because, I don't even know what causes breast cancer. And we were having a little chat before we started recording, and I loved how you phrased it. So over to you. Just talk about what causes breast cancer. Why are breasts susceptible?
I mean, I don't know. Like you said before, I'm not a doctor, but I get all my information from this amazing lady who is a doctor. Her name is Liz O'Riordan, and she was a breast surgeon who got breast cancer. And she's recently just had a second reoccurrence, and she makes fantastic videos on YouTube, on Instagram, and explains everything so clearly so you understand it in normal language, not medical language. And she said the reasons you get breast cancer: 1, you have boobs, and 2, because of hormones. Most breast cancers are hormone driven. There are so many different types of breast cancer. There's loads. It's just a complete minefield, really. There's so many different types. Different causes. You can have you could be triple negative, you could be estrogen, progesterone, HER2 positive, HER2 negative. There's lobular, this, that, and the other. There's so many different types of breast cancer. Yeah.
Well, that was the other thing I noticed, is that there's a whole language around breast cancer. A lot of the words you've also just thrown out. And I want to come back to talk about that later. But I think that one thing a lot of people might have heard about is the BRCA gene. And one of the reasons that they may have heard about the BRCA gene and the publicity around it is because Angelina Jolie, when she had a double mastectomy, etc., she brought a lot of a lot of press to what the BRCA gene is, etc. Do you know anything about that? Do you have that? Because it's a hereditary gene, isn't it? The BRCA gene.
Yes, thankfully, no, I don't. I was tested for it because I've got a family history of breast cancer. My mum had breast cancer and my nan had breast cancer. But they only actually test in the UK 10% of women that have breast cancer because it's such a low chances of you having it. And the only reason they tested me is because my mum had breast cancer premenopausal, which can make a difference the younger you are, which is why they test you. But we all carry BRCA. So there's BRCA1 and BRCA2. We all carry it. It's just whether we have the gene mutation. Yeah, thankfully, I don't have it. It was horrible, actually. It was a 12-week wait on the blood test coming back from that as to whether you have it. Because if you do, the chances are you have about an 85% chance of getting breast cancer, about a 60% chance of getting ovarian cancer, and a few other cancers. So I was very grateful I didn't carry it, but I do know people that have. I lost a very dear friend to breast cancer back in 2012. She was diagnosed at 25. Her mum had breast cancer. She carried the BRCA gene. Her sister carried the BRCA gene. She had her preventative double mastectomy 6-7 years ago. And her odds now have gone back down to someone who hasn't, to someone that's never had breast cancer and not got the gene. I've had another friend, the whole side of her dad's family carry BRCA. She's at 30 years old, who just had a preventative double mastectomy to try and help herself reduce her odds of getting it.
Yeah, that was another thing that surprised me when I was researching this, is if you'd said to me beforehand, what's the average age that someone gets breast cancer, I would have said, I don't know, probably in their 50s. And I don't know if that is the average or not, but, on this other podcast that I was listening to, there's a lot of young women in their 20s that get breast cancer. I mean, you're still a young woman. I mean, you're not in your 20s, but what is the average age, or the most, common age for when people will get breast cancer, or isn't there such a thing?
In your 60s, I think it is when you're older. If you get cancer under 50, you're considered young. I guess the thing is, we hear about younger people more because younger people and rightly so, put it out there on social media and reach out for help, because there isn't you can't relate as much when you're young to someone who's 65. You get given leaflets and pictures are all of older women, and when you're young you think that's not me. And I think that's where social media is great, because younger people do put themselves out, and then you can find each other. There's an amazing community to be able to support and help each other. But I'm pretty sure it's mid-60s is the average age.
Right. Okay. So for yourself, you said your mum had breast cancer, your nan had breast cancer. For you, when you were in your 30s, were you sort of thinking this is probably going to be an inevitability here? Were you thinking along those lines, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when?
I suppose so, yeah. I mean, when I was 30, I did go to the doctors. I had a bit of a health crisis. I was like, I'm 30, I've been on the pill half my life. So I got referred to a local unit that deals with family history. They checked me over and said, you're fine. You're not high risk, but you're not low risk. So maybe when you get to 40, come back and we'll start screening you younger. Because I think that's where the issue is. In the UK, we don't start mammogramming until women are 49, 50.
Yeah. My wife has told me that. We lived in Australia for a while, and in Australia, people have a lot more access to get mammograms, I think, pretty much whenever you want, whereas here it's quite a palaver to get one, unless you're a certain age. And obviously, the one of the things I've learned about breast cancer, or cancers in general, is that the survival rate is so much higher if it's detected, early on. So if you can't get mammograms until you're in your 50s or whatever, then that can be a problem, can't it? One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you alluded to the fact you love going to the gym and all that. How important is health and lifestyle in terms of not getting breast cancer? Is there anything you can do to, reduce your chances?
The thing is, you can't cancer-proof your life. I just think it's kind of comes down to common sense a lot of the time with all kinds of health issues. If you keep your weight at a healthy weight, you don't smoke, you drink alcohol, but not ridiculously. And if you exercise, you're doing everything you can to keep your body fit and well. And then I think if you then were to get cancer, you're in a better position to be able to cope with treatment.
Okay. So you've had a little bit of, knowledge through family, etc., and friends. But when you found out that you had breast cancer, can you talk to us about that? Like, how did that sort of impact on you? What was that moment like when you got that news?
I thought I knew, but I didn't have a clue.
Right.
I didn't know any, I thought I knew stuff, but I really didn't know anything. It was just, your world changes, and you just, all of a sudden you're just thrown into this. It's almost like having a full-time job, having cancer. The doctor's appointments, the tests, the scans, it's a whole nother world. It's a club that you don't want to ever be part of, and you always hope that you're not going to be, but it just changes there and then in that moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before you were dropping a whole lot of terminology that, because you've had cancer, you know what all those things mean, and I know that there is a language around cancer. And sometimes doctors use that language when they're talking to you in a deep state of shock that you've just been told, yes, you've got cancer. And then they start throwing all those words at you, like you've just said, you said HER2 positive or something, and, different stages and different levels. And I mean, there's just so many things. It is like another language. So were you, how do you take all that in and process it? Because it must be a bit numbing when someone gives you that, because the word cancer, I think, full stop, makes people really face their, mortality, doesn't it? It forces them to face up to their mortality. It's like, oh my God, what if? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, because I think, like you said, it's not a death sentence anymore, but you hear it and you just think, oh my God, well, that's it, I'm going to die. And I think that's the thing. There's so much information when you get your diagnosis. There is so much information. You get all these books, these leaflets, and you're thrown into a world of appointments and scans. And it's like, hold on a minute. 1 minute I was okay, and now I'm laying in a scanner having my whole body checked to see if I've got, metastatic breast cancer now, if it's spread. It's scary. It's daunting. It's lonely. It's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, from, the thing that you always hear is that you should check your breasts, obviously. And you often hear about people who've got a lump, they found a lump, or sometimes you might hear about a, discoloration or dimpling or whatever it is. But another thing that I was surprised about was that not all breast cancers are noticeable, that there is no lump, there is no discoloration. It's something that's just going on, as you said at the beginning. There's not just breast cancer isn't just one thing. It's multiple different diseases. And that is why, from what I gather, why mammograms are so important. And having your regular mammogram is a good way to, if it is invisible symptoms, no lumps, no discoloration, no cyst or whatever it is, the mammogram will still sort of show you what's going on. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, no, a lot of people will have their cancer found during mammograms, especially if you've got big boobs. Sometimes you can't always feel properly. Even people that check correctly, they can't always feel them. And that's why mammograms are so important, and people must go for them, because it can save your life. Because if it can pick up something that's deep, nearer, to the back of your boob, nearer your chest wall, it can detect, tiny cell changes. So it's so important to go for them. And when you're younger as well, they will do you an ultrasound as well. The reason why they don't like to mammogram you too young is because the younger you are, the more dense your breast tissue is. So it's harder to see. So they will often do ultrasounds as well to have a look. I think they can see a bit more clearly with an ultrasound.
Yeah. Well, that was interesting. When I was listening to some of these other podcasts, the amount of girls in their 20s, I was shocked. I didn't think that was a thing at all. At least one of them that I listened to was pregnant, 9 months pregnant. She found out she had breast cancer, and it was at the time of COVID in the UK. So, I mean, talk about because you're 9 months pregnant, you can't have any treatment. You're going to have the baby, and then you go in for all the treatment. This particular young lady survived and got through it all. But I was stunned about the likelihood of people at a range of ages that cancer knows no sort of demographic, so to speak. What about when you had to tell people? So you got told, and obviously that was a shock to whatever degree. You go home, you have to tell your mum, your family, etc. What's that like? How do you do that? That must be the hardest conversation you ever have.
I think so, because you have to manage other people's emotions. I think when it's you in a situation, you just have to deal with it. You don't have a choice. It's like, right, this has happened to me. And I suppose I was just like, this is it. But it's the one thing I just held on to that my consultant said when she told me I'd got breast cancer. It's the first thing she was like, it's treatable. And I was like, right, I'm not going to die. We can treat this. It's going to be a hell of a journey to get there. A long 8-month path to go down, but it's treatable. And I think when I first found out as well, I wasn't aware of all of those things to start with. So I'm just like, I went for this rapid diagnosis, and I left there, and they've said to me, they've taken biopsies, they've done all those sort of things, and said to me, we're very concerned this is breast cancer. But we just kind of need to know what it's done. I think those consultants, the radiologists, they know what they're looking at. They see it day in, day out. They can't say to you it's 100% cancer, because they need, to clinically check it. But I walked out of there and I thought, I've got breast cancer. But a lot of my friends would be like, oh, but you might not. It might be okay. Because I think nobody wants to see their friend. It's a really scary thing, isn't it? The thought of having cancer, because no one wants to, you hear people that have cancer, everybody knows someone that's had cancer, but no one wants to see their friend go through it. Nobody, it's terrifying. And I think people were sort of like, oh no, but you might be all right, it might be okay. And it's like, no, I've got cancer. But do you know what I think for me was the worst part was when I initially went to the doctors, and the doctor confirmed there was a lump there. And we have this 2-week pathway in the UK. So once they refer you to the breast centre, and within 2 weeks, you'll be seen for a rapid diagnosis. I got the letter. I went on the Monday. I got the letter. The minute I walked out of that doctor's, I thought, I've got breast cancer. I could feel a lump at that point. It had grown. I was like, this is it. So I think for me to kind of think, okay. And I didn't really tell many. I told a couple of my friends and my husband and, close people, but I didn't tell my clients. And I went to work for that 2 weeks, and I had to wait exactly 2 weeks for my appointment, and going to work every day and trying to pretend I was okay. I think my body then I was going through that kind of like grieving process, that kind of realization of shit. I know what's coming. So I think by the time I got to the hospital for my diagnosis day, I said to my husband, if we walk out of here and I don't have breast cancer, that'll be brilliant. But I could, in that couple of weeks, go into work and, you know, being a hairdresser, you're kind of on stage, aren't you? You have to be all like, yay, yay. And inside I was just screaming because I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, I'm having to stand here and pretend I'm okay. And that was one of the worst points, I think. And that was for me, I think the realization of, I think, I know what they're going to tell me. So I kind of went in the day I got my diagnosis and I was prepared for it, I think.
Yeah. How would you advise other people to approach those conversations? So whether you're the person with breast cancer who's going to have to go home and tell their partner, husband, boyfriend, you know, mother, father, whatever, how would you advise people? Is there a right way, a best way? I mean, because you're obviously in a state of shock when that happens as well.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing as well. When you first know that, you don't know anything. Like when we walked out of that day and I sort of, you know, messaged my friends, you know, it got to midday and my friends are like, are you okay? Like, we've not heard from you. And it's like, yeah, this isn't good news. People just, it's natural. They want to ask you loads of questions. And at that point, I didn't know anything, you know, and you start getting, my phone was going mad. I was getting like bombarded with people that they care, you know, wanted to know. And in the end, my husband said, just put your phone down. Like, it's too much. You don't need to be answering all these people's questions because it's only coming from a point of people caring. But until you know where you are and what you're doing and what your cancer pathway is going to look like, it's really hard because you just don't know. And it's the one thing I would say to anybody is just don't Google anything because it's terrifying. Just stay the hell away from Google. It's not your friend.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was hearing other people say that as well, that that is what we've got used to doing. Now we Google for every answer we need, and that there's so much misinformation.
Of course we do.
And so many, you know, snake oil salesmen on there that all make sure they're at the top of page one. So everything you read is bad news, so to speak. And that, again, that was interesting. Took me by surprise. Don't use Google, use the experts.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing, like my oncologist said to me, one of the first things he said to me is, you know, nowadays cancer, we treat everybody as cancer to their own histology of their cancer. So it's not a case of, you know, years ago it was box standard chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and that was it. But now he said, you know, please stay off Google, stay off forums, because you could have this similar cancer to 4 other women, but you could all be on different treatment because of your own histology. So that's how advanced treatment is nowadays, which is great. But also, don't compare. He said, because I'll have people say to me, well, we've got the same cancer and she's having this. Why aren't I having this? And it's just a case of just advocating for yourself like that and thinking, actually, no, I don't need to be reading stuff. And you're right, you get the horror stories on Google and it's all stats. And at the end of the day, we're not stats, we're human beings. And it's really hard to not do it, but you can't, you'll naturally, you know, you put in one question and then all these questions start coming up, don't they? What's the worst type of breast cancer? How many people die from breast cancer? And it's just a minefield. And, you know, within a few clicks, you'll be dead. So it's stay away from it.
Yeah. Okay. And another thing that I sort of touched on this before when I said it's sort of like a bit of a sisterly, it's a club that you don't want to be a member of, but because you're going along to hospital, doctors, you're meeting other women that have also got cancer. And so all of a sudden you're in this community. That's what I really felt when I was listening to this podcast series. It was like this community of women that all understood each other. Their friends and family who didn't have cancer didn't necessarily understand each other, but they all understood each other and could all talk openly about, you know, their emotions, their mental state, and what their biggest fears and stuff were. And I found that interesting. Is it like, you know, sometimes when they talk about death, they talk about the different stages of death when someone dies, the different stages of grief that you go through. I think the first stage is denial, that, you know, that can't be true. I can't off the top of my head think of all the stages of grief, but I know the first one's denial. I think the last one's acceptance, you know, and there's these other stages in it. I know one of them is anger. Is it like that emotionally, did you go through these stages of, denial? Oh no, it can't possibly be me. And then being angry about it. And then eventually accepting that, okay, this is what I've got and this is what I've got to move on with.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, coming from somebody who has experienced quite a lot of grief in my life, I don't care for the stages. I think that's rubbish. In the order of the stages that grief happens, I think you can experience all those feelings within 10 minutes of each other. It doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. It kind of, but I think people think it does, but it just doesn't. But I think when I first found out I'd got cancer, all I heard from my consultant was it's treatable. It's treatable.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of what I went with. I just thought, right, okay, she's not said I'm going to die. I'm not going to die. We can treat this. I didn't really think above that, like past that. And I think there's so much that comes with a diagnosis, in the sense of, appointments and scans and tests and this and that. And you're looking at kind of like, 8-9 months worth of active treatment. And then you're moving on to, immunotherapy. So you're looking at potentially a year to 18 months sort of a treatment before you even get into sort of realms of a chemical menopause. So I kind of just looked at it and thought, right, I need to get, knowing I had to have chemotherapy, I need to just deal with chemotherapy. I need to sort of break it down into kind of stages like that. All I kept thinking was, I need to get back to work. This happened in March. I can be back at work by Christmas. And that was kind of like my focus, really. I think I just sort of dealt with each part as it come. And I think it's easy to want to run away with yourself and kind of look towards the end, but there's so much that and it's all consuming and it's overwhelming. So actually just to deal with it in tiny little, like stage by stage in that sense of, let's do chemo. Once chemo's done, we move on to the surgery and like that. And you just kind of, you just don't have a choice. You're thrown into this world. You have no control, no choice. You kind of just have to go with it. I think, except like it's often not till you finish treatment that I think you start to kind of process what's happened, because you just very quickly you're thrown into this world and it's chaos and it's scary and there's so much to deal with that you don't have time to stop and think about it. You don't have a choice. You're there, you deal with it, and you just kind of, but that's the advice I would say to somebody else, is just try and like, don't look at it as a whole, look at it as sort of step by step, because it's sort of, then you feel like you're getting somewhere as well, I think.
Okay. Got it. Tell me about cancer ghosting. That was something that was a new term to me that I'd never heard of. And I was quite surprised by it. So talk to us about that.
Well, as I don't really think I was ever cancer ghosted. I think that's just other people not being able to cope with it because it frightens them. I think whenever anything happens, cancer, an illness, another grief, it makes people look and question their own mortality and how they would cope with it. And it frightens people. And I think you really learn when you go through something traumatic or a hard time in your life, who your friends are and who your support network is. And I think people really show their true colours when it comes to things like that. I've got one friend that couldn't, like, I'd been friends with her for years and she didn't do illness. She couldn't cope with illness. And it's like, you're not the one that's going through chemotherapy. You're not the one that's dealing with this. I didn't feel bad at her for that because she just clearly couldn't cope. And I thought, you know what? I don't need people like that around me. I need people that are going to support me and come to chemo with me and sit through the hard times and deal with the shit that I'm facing. Someone that's crying and can't cope is no good to me. But you hear it a lot of the time. You hear it with grief as well. You know, people actively will cross the road to avoid you rather than face you because they can't deal with it. And I think that's a really selfish thing. That's a them problem, isn't it? It's something.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
You know, you need to show up for people. Showing up for people when things are bad is what you need to do.
Yeah, I heard someone talking about it and they said, even if you say, I have no idea what to say, it's better than nothing. Do you know what I mean? And what you shouldn't say is all those little things like, don't worry, you're going to power through it. This isn't going to beat you. Is that correct? That you shouldn't say that? That you're better off just to say, look, I don't know what to say, but I'm just here for you, sort of thing. How does that sit with you?
Definitely, I think that, because what can you say? There's
Mm.
nothing you can say to someone to make them feel better in that moment, because it's shit. You don't know what's going to happen. You can be being treated with a curative treatment plan, but that doesn't mean that's going to necessarily happen. It's scary. Nobody knows. Nobody can say to you, yeah, you're fine. You've got this whole fight talk, this battle talk, and it's this positivity, and it's like, if only positivity cured things, it would be amazing. But I think a positive mindset helps. It can help you get up, it can help you deal with days, but it doesn't cure it. And people are very quick to start telling you to do these sort of diets and drink this juice and do this and take turmeric or take this, do that. If that all worked, then people would be doing it already. Yeah, and I've learned that through a lot of things in my life as well. I think you're better to just say to someone, do you know what? This is really shit, and I'm sorry, and I'm here to support you, because you can't say anything. I think it's that nobody likes to see anybody ill, suffering, in pain. It's a natural human reaction to want to make things better, but sometimes you can't make things better. You just have to, acknowledgement is one thing I've learned. Acknowledgement is so important, and it's just being there and showing up, and that's the best thing you can do. You can't, if only we could take the cancer away, but you can't. You just have to be as supportive as you can. And the worst thing as well is the pity head tilt, when you see people they go,
I've got
talk
to
to
keep my head
you like your
straight.
child. That I hate that. Oh my God.
Of course.
Oh, it's awful. It's just like, I'm so sorry. It's like, it's very patronizing. And I know people mean well, but it's like, just think sometimes about what you're saying. I think it is frightening and it is scary, and but sometimes it's just be real and just say, I really don't know what to say to you, but I'm here. And that's all you can be. Sometimes you can just sit with someone, you don't have to say anything, but it's acknowledging that moment, isn't it? And not making it about them. I think that's what a lot of people do. I don't know how I'd cope with this, or they'll say things like, oh yeah, my friend's mum had breast cancer and she died. I mean, that's great. And it always comes from a good place. I know that. But sometimes it's like, just don't go there. Just be like, yeah, I'm here. What do you know? And the thing is as well, I think a lot of people will say, oh, I'm here if you need me, let me know. And I think sometimes you don't know what you want. You haven't got a clue, practical help is one really good thing for people to suggest for people to do for someone like that. Rather than, because you don't know, you've got so many things happening. You don't know what's happening tomorrow. You don't need.
Yeah. What do you mean? Cook a meal, clean the house, pick you up, drop you off, do a shop for you. You mean that sort of stuff?
Definitely. If you've got children and you could pick their kids up from school or do something like that. Yeah. Cook dinners, do their laundry, clean, little things like that. Offer lists for hospitals, stuff like that. That is a sort of help that is just priceless to somebody. And the thing is that we're very proud, especially British people as well, are very proud, and we don't like to ask for help. And I think a lot of the time people don't, like, you feel like a burden. You don't want to say that to people. Oh, can you do this? Can you do that? And I think it's just show up and do it, rather than be like, oh, I'm here. Let me know what I can do for you. It's so insincere. You're not going to ask that of that person, but actually, right, what do you need me to do? I'll go and walk your dog for you. I'll go and do your weekly shopping. Perfect. That's the sort of help people need.
Okay. As a hairdresser, let's turn not on the attention, not on you now, but on the client, because everyone listening to this, or the majority of them, are hairdressers. As a hairdresser, I certainly have had to, shave someone's head because of cancer on more than one occasion. And it's difficult, to put it mildly. But as a hairdresser, what are some of the things that you can do to help? Or is there nothing? If a client comes into you and, they sit down and they say, listen, I'm on chemotherapy or whatever, and I'm starting to lose my hair, and, maybe they're in tears or whatever. Like, what is the approach? I mean, I had a situation like that in my salon once, and I was someone else was shampooing her hair, and this kid was just sobbing because they'd never seen this before. The client was, look, I've been there before. It's not the first time. It's not the end of the world. Let's just get the clippers out. She went and sat at the backwash with a bob with blonde highlights. She got up with 90% of her hair left in the basin, And then she went and sat down in the chair, leaving most of the staff in tears, and proceeded to get the clippers and ask me if I could finish it for her, which I did. And that's, that was my first sort of baptism of fire, to tell you the honest truth about it. I've never forgotten it. That was over 30 years ago. So what are some things in a professional capacity that you should do?
It's hard. Hold on, I need to think about this.
Let me ask you some questions then. Can you do colour? Can you colour someone's hair when they're on chemotherapy, or is that just a stupid suggestion?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I mean, I guess it all depends. If not on chemotherapy, you lose your hair. It's not every type of chemotherapy. People that your hair's going to shed anyway, even if you're on a chemo that doesn't attack your hair. I personally, I would not put more chemicals on it. You could probably still have your hair cut, I guess, if you're not losing your hair. But I guess I've only ever had people come in pre chemotherapy and say, I'm going to lose my hair, so therefore can you just cut it either really short or shave it off for me? And I agree. I think that's one of the most distressing things. I had to do it with my friend Emily when she first got diagnosed, and she went for chemotherapy. She tried the cold cap, she didn't like it, and she came into me and her hair was just like a matted mess, where chemotherapy really dries your hair out. And I gently washed it, and I remember just putting the comb in, and her hair just came out. And like you said, I was sobbing. I was just like, this is just awful. It's so distressing to do it, to see someone like that. And I just think it screams cancer patient as well. And that's what people don't like. It's just.
No, when I heard you on this other podcast, that you were the lucky one out of the three ladies that were being interviewed, because you didn't lose your hair. You lost a little bit of it, apparently. I think I heard you saying that you'd shed some hair, but you certainly didn't lose all your hair or have to have it shaved off. And you said something that really took me back. And I wasn't sure if it was a sort of a bit of a throwaway line or if you really meant it. And what you said was, I would never, I would never want to lose my hair. I would rather lose a breast than lose my hair. Just tell me what you meant by that, because that sort of rocks you back on your feet a little bit. Okay, the hair's going to grow back. As far as I know, the breast is not going to. Tell me about that, because that's, we've had a little bit of a conversation about this before we started recording, and it was intriguing, your response to that.
Well, I think for me, the thought of throughout the years having to shave people's hair off and do all that sort of stuff, I'd always thought that, if I ever was unfortunate enough to have cancer, the thought of losing my hair, I was just distraught by it. I thought that must be one of the worst things to happen. And like before I started chemotherapy, I mean, my hair was down to my waist. I just liked my hair. It's so much your hair, isn't it? It's your identity, it's your femininity, it's so much. And the thought of it, and I think as soon as I got my diagnosis, I knew I had to have a mastectomy straight off. And I kind of guessed at that point, I kind of just completely, my boob wasn't part of me anymore. I thought it's trying to kill me. It's got to go. So I suppose I just disassociated myself with it, because I thought it's going and I'm going to be reconstructed. And yes, of course I know my hair's going to go back. I'm a hairdresser. But actually, it was of everything, obviously, other than dying. I was like, I can't lose my hair. I cannot lose my hair. No way. I don't want to.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I've learned is lots of terminology: radiotherapy, hormone therapy, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, mastectomy, all sorts of alternative therapies, reconstruction. But there's another one called cold cap, which I hadn't heard of, which is probably my naivety. But I know that you're quite an advocate of the cold cap. So what exactly is it? Give us a little bit of detail on it, because it seems to be one of those things you either love or hate.
Okay, so the cold cap's been around for a long, long time. It basically, you wear a cold cap during chemotherapy, and it has a number of things going on. which basically reduces the blood flow to your hair follicles to protect them from the chemotherapy. Chemotherapy at the moment it attacks your fastest dividing cells first, which is your hair is the second one. And at the moment, it can't tell the difference between good cells and bad cells. So it just destroys all of them, which often results in hair loss. So by restricting the blood flow to your follicles, it protects them and doesn't allow as much chemotherapy in. So therefore, you can maintain your hair. Not all of it. You have a 50% chance of retaining 50% of your hair, depending on your drug regime. There's loads of different combinations of drug regimes. There's 2 different types of drug groups. One is a little bit harsher than the other. And yeah, we all know as hairdressers, we shed hair. We shed 100 to 150 hairs a day. And when that happens, you don't notice it. I mean, I never used to think anything of getting out the shower and pulling a plug full of hair out of the sink when my hair was long. But when you're looking at when you see your hair shedding, I mean, that in itself is quite distressing. But it's going to shed. But I would say I reckon I probably lost about 25% of my hair. I mean, I did. I cut my hair off. I cut my hair into a really short little bob. I donated it to the Little Princess Trust, which is a charity which makes wigs for children's hair. It's fantastic. So I thought, I had 12, 13 inches I cut off my hair. So that felt good by doing that. And I think there's a real thing with hair loss and cancer, and it's about taking control. And I think people, you feel very helpless. You lose so much through cancer and you have very little control. And I think a lot of people will say, I'm going to take control of this by shaving off my hair, which I applaud. And I think that's great. But for me, I was like, I'm going to take control because I don't want to lose my hair. It's the one thing I can try and keep. My boobs going, my life's going for the next 8-9 months. But you know what? If I can get up every day and I can look in the mirror and I can still look like me, then that will be great. And I can categorically say, if I had have lost my hair, I think my whole cancer experience would have been a lot different. It really helped me. It really did. I mean, it's hard work. You have to maintain your hair very different. You can't wash your hair as much. You have to wash it very gently, but you get into a routine of doing it. And I was very, very so grateful. I mean, Paxman, who are the company, the scalp cooling machine, they're the global leaders. It's in the UK. It's in 98% of hospitals, free to use. And I know they're global. They're in America. They're in about 60 countries. And I know in America that there's one insurance company that have just recognized them. So you can get it on the insurance. Because I remember when I was going through my treatment, looking on Instagram and talking to a few girls, that they were having to pay $500 a go for the cold cap. Which, you think we've got that sitting in our hospitals and it's just not, there's a lot of negativity around it. I think a lot of people, again, it's not understanding it. I think, until the amount of people now I talk to that have never heard of the cold cap, and unless you've had cancer or, been around someone that has, you might not know about it. And I think we need to have more education on it because it does work and it is now scientifically proven as well. It's not, some of these harsher drug systems, maybe you'll lose 70-80% of your hair, but they have proven that if you cold cap, your hair will regrow twice as fast and thicker for the first 12 weeks.
I was going to say, there's a thing that they sometimes talk about with cancer curls or chemo curls. As your hair grows back, it's sometimes softer and a little bit curly. Is that a thing? I do know someone who said that they had that, like curly hair, whereas beforehand they had straight hair. But it was a temporary thing. It did straighten out eventually as well. Is that something that is a thing?
Yeah, well, chemotherapy temporarily changes the DNA of your hair. So therefore, when it comes back, it might come back. Some people, when they're grey, they'll lose, their hair comes out and then it will come back like brown or blonde. It can come back curly, it can come back straight. It often will go back to what it was, but that is the chemotherapy that's temporarily changing that DNA.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So tell us about life after cancer. You go through these different stages and now, are you in remission? Are you cancer free?
Well, yeah, I mean, you never get told that, it's not sort of, how you see it on TV or on the films. Like, you don't skip
Okay.
off, that's it, it's all done. You know, we don't have scans. We don't have scans afterwards. As far as they're concerned, they've given you the best treatment you can have. You get put onto I've been put into a chemical. I had immunotherapy for a year to help stop the cancer coming back. I've been put into a chemical menopause, which again stops the estrogen in my body. So hopefully that will stop it coming back. The further down the line you get, I think reoccurrence often can be within the first year to 2 years. But yeah, I've actually just got to the point. I'm 4 years post surgery, so I think I've done quite well in that sense. I'm essentially 4 years cancer free,
Good.
which is great. But you the fear, and it's not a case of. I mean, this is a sentence to say, but primary diagnosis doesn't frighten me. It's a secondary diagnosis, which is scary, and I think secondary breast cancer is not spoken about enough. 30% of primary breast cancer comes back as secondary, and 31 women a day die of secondary breast cancer. And that's the thing that people need to be aware of. You know, it can come back in your liver.
Right. So what does that mean? That it spreads from the breast to, you know, like you just said, your bones or your liver or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah, secondary breast cancer, it's breast cancer, but it's gone to another part of your body. So it's gone to you. Often breast cancer will come back in your bones, in your liver, in your lungs, in your brain. And that would be other terms. It would be called metastasized stage 4 cancer. So it's treatable, but it's incurable. So therefore it's life limiting. But that's something that needs a lot more attention on, and a lot more funding, and, you know, medicine, and that to be able to prolong people's lives a lot longer. And that frightens me, because one of my friends is one of my friends is 10 years younger than me, and she was about a year behind me in treatment, and she was 18 months out of treatment, and she got diagnosed with secondary breast cancer in her brain. She's 36 years old, and it's horrible. It's just heartbreaking to see. And we actually you know, there is a massive community of you know, cancer community. She only yesterday, a real, you know, poignant figure, Nicky, her name was, in the cancer community. She died yesterday, and she'd been living with metastatic breast cancer for 5.5 years. And it's just, it really brings it home just how fragile life is, and how, you know, just how frightening it is. It kind of puts you back to that thing. Oh my God, you know, when you're in it, when you have a diagnosis and you're involved in that community, yes, you do see more of it than somebody that wouldn't. But it just, every single time you just think, God, it's such a cruel disease, and it's something that we just need to, people just need to be so aware. I think nowadays it's about prevention more than anything. It's making sure that you check your boobs, and your body, not just your boobs, you know, just generally. It's just doing little health checks, keep an eye on yourself, and anything that's not your normal, don't be frightened to go and check it out. Yes, it is scary, but actually it's scary if you don't do it and you leave it.
Yeah, sure. We need to start wrapping up in a few minutes, but I want to ask you a couple of things. You have been through a lot of dark moments over the last 4 or 5 years, losing your husband, breast cancer, all of this stuff. It's, you know, it's dark, to put it mildly. I want to ask you the opposite to that. What's been the most uplifting moment for you? Is there anything that stands out that maybe someone has done or said, or some experience that you've had and that you've just thought, wow, that's, you know, special? Doesn't have to be a big thing.
But I got to meet, I mean, my friends, I'm so grateful for my friends. I've got the most wonderful group of friends, which I just love and adore, and have just been amazing. And I think as well, like, you know, future dreams, meeting, you know, getting involved with them and meeting a community of people. And I've got to meet some people that I've wanted to. I got to meet a girl called Lauren who does a podcast. Well, she used to do a podcast here, You, Me, Big C Cancer Podcast, which is a brilliant listen to anyone who wants to. I got to meet her at a charity event, and that I was really humbled by that. And I got to tell her how her podcast made me feel, and that made me feel really good.
Good.
And I think just being able to help, I've spoken to spoken to quite a few women since. Anyone now whose friends get diagnosed with cancer and they're scared about losing their hair, I'll speak to them, talk them through the cold cap. And most people now have managed to keep their hair. And I feel for me, that's a real passion now. I feel we need to educate. I'd love every hairdresser to be able to know about the cold cap and to be able to, next time someone comes in and says, oh God, I've got to start chemotherapy, shave off my hair, for your hairdresser to say, have you heard about the cold cap? I think we have such a good relationship as a hairdresser. I think people trust us. They come into us, they confide in us, they tell us, their darkest, deepest secrets sometimes. And actually, for your hairdresser to be able to give you that information, and as a hairdresser to be able to see your client not have to go through that, and I'm not saying the hairdresser, learns what to do or anything like that, but it's just knowing about it and just saying, look, check your hospital, see if you've got a cold cap. It doesn't work for everyone. People might not want to do it, but I feel that now that's kind of where my passion lies. I really want that out there, that there's this product that can really make a difference for you.
Yeah. Is it something that has the potential to be a service in a salon, or does it have to be in a hospital, the cold cap?
No, you can only have it done when you only have it on when you're having chemotherapy.
Oh, right, at the same time as the drugs.
You wear it during your chemotherapy treatment. Yeah, right, so you just wear it for you wear it for your chemotherapy time. Yeah, so it's in the hospitals.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Let me ask you this before we wrap up. How has it changed you?
I don't care about a lot of things anymore.
Okay.
I think post cancer, I think once I finished my radiotherapy, me and my husband said, right, we've always just worked. We need to get a better work-life balance. It's having a health scare like that, it's terrifying, and it's like, right, we need to live life a little bit more. And I think him then dying, it just completely again changed my perspective going into COVID. And I just think I just don't care anymore. Life's fragile, it's precious, so we need to go and grab it, we need to live it. And I just don't sweat the small stuff. Things that used to bother me, I just don't care about now. There's no point in getting stressed, there's no point in getting angry. Just spend time with people you want to be with. Like tell people you love them, tell people you care about them, and just try and make your life as happy as you can make it, because you just not, tomorrow's not guaranteed for any of us, and we just need to embrace life because we get one shot at it, and that's it.
They're good final words, but I did have one more final lot of words, and that is, what advice would you give to young women or women out there? Because I read a statistic recently that said in the UK, so this is just in the UK, but I'm sure it's similar in the United States and Australia and everywhere, is that they're saying in the UK that post-COVID, that because of the lockdowns and people not being able to get to hospitals, they're estimated that there are over 1 million women walking around with undiagnosed cancer. That's a frightening statistic. I mean, if it's 1 million in this country and we've got 60 million population, then it's probably 5 million in America. I don't know, 300,000 or something in Australia. That's a lot of people. What advice would you give to, a woman listening to this who maybe hasn't had a mammogram for a while, maybe doesn't, physically check herself out, touch her body, find out, go to the doctors on a regular basis? What advice would you give them as a final thing before we wrap up?
Start doing it. I know we can't have mammograms, which is fine, but check yourself. You don't need to do it all the time, but once a month, same sort of time every month. There are tons of videos out there to learn how to do it properly, but we have to advocate for our own bodies. The same you'd go for a smear test. These things, it's scary because you think, oh God, what if I find something? But actually, you can save your life by doing it. And it's not just lumps, it's looking at a change in your skin, a change in your nipple, a swelling. It's not just a lump we're looking for, but when you have to check yourself, check it. 9 out of 10 lumps are nothing, but you just have to check your body. You have to advocate for yourself, and you know your body, know you're normal. And if you're worried about something, then go to the doctors. And yes, it's scary, but actually if you do nothing, it's far scarier. And it's all about catching things early. The earlier you catch a cancer, the more chance you've got of walking away from it with a curative,
Yeah.
being cured from it.
Yeah, good.
But
Good.
just check yourself. You have check your boobs
Mm.
every month.
Right. Okay. So look, we do need to wrap up. For our listeners, I want to give them a couple of resources. I've talked about the podcast. I'm sure there's lots of good podcasts out there about breast cancer. This is the only one I've listened to. It's called And Then Along Came Breast Cancer. That's what it's called. And Then Along Came Breast Cancer. So if you put that in any of the podcast search engines, you will find that. And I don't know how many episodes there are, but, I watched probably 10 or a dozen of them at least. They were all fascinating, a great education, and something that we should all do. You can see that I need to get out more often, probably. But so definitely have a look at that. Have a listen to that Future Dreams podcast and website. The Future Dreams website is futuredreams.org.uk, and I'll put a link for that in the show notes for the podcast. And I'll put a link for the podcast also in my show notes, because I highly, highly recommend them. So, Nicky, where would you, at a more local level, is there any particular resources? You mentioned a lady a couple of times who you said she has a great YouTube channel. I think you even said she was a doctor or a professor, and she does some really common sense, good talking about breast cancer. What was her name?
Her name is Liz O'Riordan. I think I've pronounced that correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I can send you a link for her if you want to. She's absolutely brilliant. And the other podcast I would highly recommend is the You Me Big C podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's 3 women who have had different types of cancer. Sadly, 2 of them have now died. But it's it was brilliant. They were like my best friends sitting there during my treatment. They were absolutely, it really helped get me through. That was brilliant. I would definitely recommend that.
Good. Okay. Well, I will also put that link in our podcast. So if you're listening to this podcast with Nicky and have enjoyed it, do me a favor, take a screenshot on your phone, share it to your Instagram stories, and get the word out. So, Nicky, to wrap up, thank you for being on this week's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast. And thank you for being brave and courageous and giving an open and honest, dialogue about what's been a deeply intimate and personal part of your life. And I just want to say I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's been really good. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to connect with us, you'll find us at growmysalonbusiness.com or on Facebook and Instagram at growmysalonbusiness. And if you enjoyed tuning into our podcast, make sure that you subscribe, like, and share it with your friends. Until next time, this is Anthony Whitaker, wishing you continued success.